See, I'm old enough to have believed the Warren Commission findings. I'm old enough and naive enough to have believed the inquiry from when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. So never, never again will I cast aspersions on so-called conspiracy theorists. I have the utmost respect for people who are looking into 9/11. And I think that they're doing a job that should have been done, of course, by the 9/11 Commission, which was on purpose, was not. So my bottom line is, there is a cover-up, folks. There's clearly a cover-up. And the question is, what's being covered up? Now, you may find this hard to believe, but people who have worked in the federal bureaucracy kind of know that there is no end to the federal bureaucracy's ability to screw up. I mean, just when you think it couldn't get any worse, it does, okay? So it's a real possibility that this is gross malfeasance, gross negligence, just a whole bunch of things that just didn't go right. That's becoming increasingly difficult for me to believe. Suffice it to say that, you know, the two great books I find on this are David Ray Griffin's books, the Second Pearl Harbor, New Pearl Harbor, and then the 9/11 Commission, Omissions and Distortions. And the evidence is all hanging out there. So many unanswered questions. Why are they unanswered questions? Because the administration refuses to answer the questions. And so, you know, if they want to dispel suspicions, why don't they just answer the damn questions, is what I'm saying, okay? So, what we need to do is pursue this. Does it strain credulity for me to believe that the Vice President knew something about 9/11 and caused the stand down of some of our planes? Not at all. He's capable of that. And there's circumstantial evidence. You know, here he is in the bunker with Secretary of Transportation Mineta. This functionary comes in saying, forget the exact minutes, but 10 minutes out, sir, same instructions? Yeah, same instructions. 5 minutes later, 4 minutes out, sir, same instructions? Yeah, did I change the instructions? 3 minutes later, something piles into the Pentagon, okay? Now that's sort of suspicious. Now how did the 9/11 Commission treat that? They didn't, you know? And here's the president down in Sarasota, at that grammar school, okay?
Yeah.
You've all seen the 9/11 stuff, you know, blinded in the headlights, okay? But think about it. Andy Card tells the president the second plane is hit, right? You saw that, okay? What you didn't see or hear is the Secret Service guy who said immediately, we're out of here. What happens? My pet goat for the next 23 minutes, you know? Everybody in the world knows where the President of the United States is, and yet he stays there. So somebody countermanded the instinct of the Secret Service. Somebody knew that the President was not in danger, and they could read his book, and, you know, so merrily go off to the airport where the plane was ready, and go up and ask Cheney where to fly to. And of course, the circumstantial evidence includes the writings of the Project for the New American Century, and that famous essay which said, you know, we can do all these things as a superpower, and it'll be much easier if there were a catalytic event, a catalytic catastrophe like Pearl Harbor, you know. So you don't have to be paranoid. You don't have to be conspiratorial to look into these things. And so I would urge each and every one of you. There's a lot of brain power here today, I can see. Pay heed to these folks. There are interesting videos out there and lots of stuff. And don't be deterred by people saying, you're a conspiracy theorist. These are very serious people for the most part, and they ought to be read. You know, when you think of your children, as I do now, my grandchildren, you know, what kind of a place are we going to leave to these folks? And how are we going to answer our grandchildren when they say, what did you do? Or why didn't you do more when our democracy was being taken from us? So I think each of us needs to sort of sit down in a serious way and discern what's possible for us. And the only guideline that I know is don't do anything alone. You need a community. You need it can be real small, but you need some folks to hold you accountable, to give you guidance, to keep you from going off half-cocked. And I feel very privileged to have that kind of community that's sort of restraining me and, you know, telling me to keep my temper. So get a small group around you and then realize that, as Cesar Chavez used to say, talking won't do it, writing won't do it, interviews won't do it. What you need is to act, okay? And you can't wait for a majority to act. There are enough of us. We need to act now. And without action, you're just kidding yourself. So what kind of action would that take? Well, there are civil disobedience ways to do it. The 8 who occupied Senator Gregg's office there in Concord, I guess. And so, just find something that you feel comfortable in doing. Maybe it's a little stretch for you, but try it, but do it with a small community of folks. And if there's time, I can tell you, first time I got arrested when Catholic worker types down there in D.C. said, "Ray, we want you to come along with us here and just join in a liturgy outside the White House on the 12th anniversary of the incineration of 408 Iraqi women and children in the shelter of Al-Amaraya during the first Gulf War, when smart bombs from U.S. planes found their way down the ventilator shafts and incinerated 408 women and children." They thought that should be observed. They showed that should be marked. There should be something in front of the White House on the anniversary of that day, all the more so since it was February 13, 2003, and it seemed all but certain that we're going to do the same thing again. So we did that, and it was an experience that, well, it takes 5 minutes to tell you, but an experience I wouldn't have missed forever. We were arrested, we were put in prison, we went to court, and I tell you, you get involved with committed people who know what they're doing and why, and you have all kinds of biblical quotations fulfilled in your presence. They're going to throw you into court. Don't be afraid of what you say. We'll be given the words to say. Just remember that this is your time for witness. So when McGovern's running out the door, his Catholic worker type said, "Stay here, we'll talk to the judge." And we gave her a full account of why we were doing what we were doing. And when he ended, he said, "No, Your Honor," it was an African-American woman. My friend Art Laffin said, "Well, Your Honor, I imagine we'll be seeing each other soon again." We left, and then they explained to me the reason why the arresting officer didn't show up. She was a black woman officer, and we talked to her in the van where we were kept for several hours before we were put in prison, and we told her what we were doing. And it was very clear to my friends, it never occurred to me, that civil disobedience can be contagious, that she was not going to be any part of this stuff because it would be her sons or her husband or her uncle or her brother who would be sent over there to die in Iraq. And we explained what we were doing. So she didn't show up in court to press charges against us. A major offense for a policeman. And so I'm saying, wow, you think that's what it is? Ray, very often this happens. People do this, so it is contagious. Bottom line, get involved with a small group of committed people, and then kind of discern. So we're going to set ourselves a month to discern what it is we can do that's a little bit more of a stretch than we've been accustomed to doing, because the times call for it. And I really do believe that we have between now and November to do it. And that's why I fear, I didn't even mention this with respect to Iran, that the president's poll numbers are one of the things that's driving this. Because I can see Karl Rove and the rest of them saying, look, you need to do something drastic. You need to become a war president again. You need to be able to strut around and say, our guys are engaged and we got a major war in our hands. And that sounds terribly cynical, but I've watched these guys for the last 5 years. It's not at all cynical, it's realistic. So I think we really only have a couple of months to do our thing, and I think that the earlier we get our act together, the better. Well, the big thing right now is to cut off funds for the war. I mean, I can't abide people who say, I voted against it before I voted for it, or I voted for it before. I mean, my goodness, Kerry made me sick this time around. And now to have folks who say, I'm against the war, but now I'm going to vote for funding it because we don't leave. The only thing that will speak to the Pentagon is, it's just like Vietnam. But that didn't happen until we got out in the street, folks, until enough people were affected. Now, this time there's no draft. And that's a real impediment because people aren't affected. But people of good conscience need to be affected even without a draft. And that's why I appeal to you. Whether you get out in the streets or you find some equivalent, we need to do it, and we need to do it right quick, because otherwise it will just go on. You know damn well that the framers of our Constitution came out of that English experience, where the king would merrily march people off to war, for their own good, of course, but the people wouldn't have a word to say about that, okay? And they were hell-bent and determined to prevent that from ever happening in this country. And that's why in the very first article of the Constitution, they reserved the power to declare or authorize war to the elected representatives of the people, not in the executive, but in the Congress, okay? And they must be turning over in their grave now, watching at our lukewarm, our weak-kneed, our unbackboned representatives not standing up and say, this is too much, because it is.